Hey there, this is a video where I am going to talk about a video I came across that was discussing an easy power modification for the Mark 8 Golf R and GTI, which involved removing the snow guard air baffle. And the consumer testimonial was talking about the increased noise, faster boost onset, and also nothing about power because they said it didn't change power, but that was the title of the video. But this person was stating that they were feeling a difference in throttle response, and thought that doesn't seem likely. And they'd asked if I'd ever used tried changing it out. I've changed out a hell of a lot of parts on the intake, but I didn't see any point in doing that because I knew it didn't make much difference. But hey, you know what? I got the stock airbox in the car. I've got an air baffle sitting around. What the hell, I'll try it. So what am I going to do? I've got the Mobitech M520 turbocharger in there. It's hybrid, much bigger than the stock one, so it's slower to build up boost. If you're trying to detect changes in how quickly boost builds up, having a slower boosting turbocharger is awesome for that because it's going to take longer. It's going to show differences a little more clearly. So good setup for that. And I don't have the air baffle in the car right now. So go out and third gear, starting around 2000 RPM, punch the accelerator and wait for the boost to get past 20 PSI. And repeat that a number of times for a couple of reasons. One, I did it at a couple different engine speeds just because that changes the amount of airflow coming out of the engine, which is the energy that drives the turbine, which is what spins the compressor wheel and builds up the boost pressure. So you want to keep that fairly consistent. And as the curves will show you, it changes how quickly the boost builds depending on the engine speed, which I think most people realize that. So I went for 2000 RPM. Still, that is hard to press the accelerator to the floor at precisely 2000 RPM over and over again to get some data. So I set a threshold within 100 RPM of 2100 was a good data point. Did that a number of times, I don't know, about 10 times. First thing I did was, without the air baffle, went out, and here's the chart of it. You can see along the bottom, there's the engine speed. When I push the pedal down, I did this at a couple different engine speeds just for the sake of completeness, but I really focused on trying to do it around 2000 RPM. That's where the turbocharger is going to take a little longer, so if this is making it quicker to spool, this seems like a good RPM. So the next chart here is I drove home, removed the air baffle, went back out, did it again. And here we go with that data. Oh my God, it makes a difference. A little bit faster spool up when you have that air baffle out. And of course I've said it doesn't, and this then raises the question of, okay, well, you're either wrong or there's something else going on. And thinking about it, there's probably something else going on, which would be what? The engine and everything around it is heating up. So the first time out without the air baffle, the engine and everything else was nice and cool. And I started getting on the boost and did that a bunch of times, came back, parked, went in, worked on I have a different airbox that I had the air baffle in, and so worked on taking that out of there, going back over to the car, putting the air baffle in, and then putting it back together, and heading back out and getting the data. So when I did it without the air baffle, it was kind of cooler than it was when I had with the air baffle. And for those who are thinking, oh, the ambient temperature and the intake, well, what about the intake, the intercooler? We're talking about what's going into the turbocharger, that air. And if that gets heated up, it becomes less dense. To lower the density, if the turbocharger has to increase the density to get it to 20 pounds of pressure, it's got a longer way to go, which will take more time. So if the intake components had heated up, that could be causing the turbocharger to take longer when the air baffle was installed. So how do I check this? Gonna go back out again. Except this time I'm gonna take the air baffle back out, go back to configuration number 1 and do it over again. So I now did that, got another 10 to 15 data points, plot them, here you go. Yep, exactly overlaying each other. Conclusion, when you let the engine heat up so you get a consistent intake temperature going into the turbo, now we're getting the same result. Changing the air baffle makes no difference. And you can see actually the temperature from being a warm engine to not so warm made far more difference than taking the air baffle out. And even still around the 2000 RPM, trying to get it right, you still get variation. That's just random noise. And that's something else. You can't just take one data point and compare them, because there's just run-to-run variation that could be great enough to be a difference that you're thinking is something else, a part making. So the video was decently done. The person walked through how to do it, talked about what they thought, but it was all based on opinion. So this was a good example of how someone, trying to make a review and help others out, but not getting the objective data that you really need and relying on subjective perceptions of what's going on. And when you're talking about some of these differences and the small amounts of power, not too hard to get data for this, and really should be looking for that when you can. And the same thing goes for the vendors that are selling products where they've got a financial incentive to convince you that taking this part out or using a different part is going to make a difference. Ask for the data. If it really does it, it's a performance part. If it really does it, then they should have ample evidence along with the conditions that they've tested under, how they've collected, for you to be able to review. If they can't, you ought to be suspect on whether or not they're telling you the truth. One of the interesting takeaways from this is, like I said, I saw this Mark 8, and I'm like, okay, I don't know Mark 8, but the Mark 7 and the Mark 8 have very similar intake setup. Removing this thing didn't make a difference 7 years ago. Somebody saying, oh, it makes a great difference now, probably should cause people to question that. Most of this stuff I've tried to get some solid information on, so you don't have to go off of seat of the pants opinions, which are very suspect. It's gonna happen though.